Sarah never imagined that opening a small bookstore would lead to a war with the richest family in town. What started as her dream to bring literature to Millbrook's main street ended with her husband quietly purchasing half the commercial district. But that night, as she swept up the broken glass from her vandalized storefront for the third time that month, she had no idea Marcus was already 3 steps ahead, planning something that would shake the entire Henderson empire to its core. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in Millbrook, Pennsylvania, Sarah Chen had always found refuge between the pages of books. Her parents owned a small family restaurant on the outskirts of town, working 16-hour days to make ends meet. While other kids spent summers at camps or vacation homes, Sarah spent hers curled up in the corner booth of Chen's kitchen, devouring everything from classic novels to poetry collections that customers occasionally left behind. The town's only bookstore had closed when Sarah was 12, leaving a gaping hole in her world. She remembered the day old Mr. Peterson locked the doors of Peterson's books for the final time, his shoulders sagging under the weight of defeat. The big box stores an hour away had slowly drained his customer base until keeping the lights on became impossible. Sarah had pressed her face against the dusty window, watching him pack away the last of the books that had been her constant companions. That day she made herself a promise. Someday she would bring books back to Millbrook. College took her to Philadelphia, where she studied English literature and business management. She worked nights at a campus bookstore, learning everything from inventory management to customer service. Her professors encouraged her to pursue graduate school, perhaps teaching, but Sarah's heart remained tethered to her small hometown and the dream of that empty storefront on Main Street. After graduation, she returned home and took a job at the local bank, saving every penny she could. Her parents worried she was throwing away her education, but Sarah remained focused on her goal. She spent weekends driving to estate sales and library clearances, slowly building a collection of books in her childhood bedroom. Her plan was simple but ambitious. Save enough money to lease the old Peterson space and transform it into the kind of bookstore that could serve as the heart of the community. It was during one of these weekend book hunting expeditions that fate intervened. Sarah was at an estate sale in the wealthy Riverside district, carefully examining a collection of first-edition classics, when she noticed another buyer eyeing the same books. He was tall, with kind eyes and an easy smile, dressed casually but carrying himself with quiet confidence. "Beautiful collection," he said, nodding toward the leather-bound volumes Sarah was holding. "Dickens is underrated these days." "Most people don't appreciate the social commentary," Sarah replied, surprised to find someone who seemed genuinely interested in literature rather than just investment pieces. His observations about class and inequality feel remarkably relevant. They spent the next hour discussing books, literature, and the importance of independent bookstores. Marcus Hamilton introduced himself simply as someone who appreciated good books and small businesses. He didn't mention that he owned a chain of successful tech companies, or that his family's wealth dated back 4 generations. To Sarah, he was just a fellow book lover who seemed genuinely interested in her dream of reopening Millbrook's bookstore. When Marcus asked her to coffee the following weekend, Sarah said yes without hesitation. Their relationship developed slowly, built on long conversations about everything from philosophy to their shared love of obscure poetry. Marcus would drive to Millbrook to take her to dinner at small local restaurants, never suggesting the expensive places in the city that Sarah assumed were more his style. He seemed content to fit into her world rather than pulling her into his. 6 months into their relationship, Sarah finally learned the truth about Marcus's background. They were having dinner at Chen's kitchen when her father mentioned seeing his name in the business section of the newspaper. Marcus had just closed a major acquisition deal, one that apparently made headlines in the financial world. Sarah stared at him across the familiar Formica table, processing this new information. "You're that Marcus Hamilton," she said quietly, "the tech mogul." Marcus set down his chopsticks, his expression serious. "I was going to tell you, I like being seen for who I am, not what I own." Sarah understood. In her small town, everyone knew everyone's business, their family history, their financial situation. The freedom to be seen simply as themselves was something both she and Marcus had been craving. His wealth didn't change how she felt about him, but it did make her more determined to achieve her bookstore dream independently. She refused his offers to help with startup costs, insisting that this was something she needed to build herself. 2 years later, Marcus proposed in the same corner booth at Chen's kitchen, where Sarah used to read as a child. The ring was beautiful, but not ostentatious, reflecting his understanding of what mattered to her. They married in a simple ceremony at the local community center, surrounded by family and friends who had known Sarah her entire life. Marcus's wealthy relatives seemed puzzled by the modest venue and home-cooked reception, but Sarah felt perfectly at peace. With her savings finally sufficient and Marcus's emotional support behind her, Sarah signed the lease on the old Peterson space. The storefront needed significant work, but she could envision exactly what it would become. Bright, welcoming spaces for reading and community events, carefully curated sections for local authors, a children's corner where the next generation could fall in love with books the way she had. The renovations took months, but Sarah threw herself into every detail. She painted walls, refinished floors, and personally selected every piece of furniture. Marcus helped when he could, though his business often kept him traveling. He never once suggested hiring contractors or speeding up the process with additional funding. This was Sarah's vision, and he respected her need to build it with her own hands. The day Sarah hung the sign, reading chapter and verse books, felt like the culmination of a lifelong dream. The grand opening drew a surprisingly large crowd, including many longtime residents who remembered the old Peterson store fondly. Sarah sold more books in her first week than she had dared hope for her first month. For the first 6 months, chapter and verse exceeded every expectation. Sarah hosted reading groups, author events, and story times for children. The store became a gathering place for the community, exactly as she had envisioned. Local writers found a platform for their work. Teenagers discovered authors they had never heard of. Elderly residents found comfortable chairs and welcoming conversation. But Sarah's success hadn't gone unnoticed by everyone in town. The Henderson family, who owned most of Millbrook's commercial real estate, had been watching the bookstore's progress with growing concern. For 3 generations, the Hendersons had controlled the economic development of downtown Millbrook. They decided which businesses thrived and which ones struggled, often based on their own financial interests rather than community needs. Victoria Henderson, the family matriarch, had different plans for Main Street. She envisioned high-end boutiques and upscale restaurants that would attract wealthy visitors from the city. A small bookstore serving the local community didn't fit her vision of Millbrook's future. More problematically, Sarah's success was proving that independent businesses could thrive without Henderson backing, a precedent Victoria found deeply troubling. The first sign of trouble came subtly. Sarah began noticing that her usual suppliers were having delivery delays. Orders that used to arrive within days now took weeks. When she called to inquire, she received vague explanations about logistics issues and route changes. It was frustrating, but not catastrophic, until the delays began affecting her ability to stock new releases and fulfill special orders. Then, the building inspections started. City officials appeared at chapter and verse with increasing frequency, citing minor violations that required expensive corrections. A loose handrail that had been perfectly adequate for months suddenly became a safety hazard. The vintage electrical fixtures Sarah had carefully restored were deemed non-compliant with updated codes. Each violation came with fines and mandatory improvements that ate into her slim profit margins. Sarah tried to address each issue as it arose, but the constant interruptions made it difficult to focus on serving customers. She spent more time dealing with inspectors and contractors than with the community programs that had made her store special. Reading groups were canceled when construction noise made the space unusable. Author events were postponed when electrical work shut down half the store. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in October. Sarah was staying late to prepare for a children's Halloween story event when she heard glass breaking at the front of the store. She rushed from the back office to find her front window shattered, books scattered across the floor, and a brick lying among the broken glass. Spray painted across her carefully restored door were the words, "Go home." Sarah called the police, but their response was lukewarm at best. Officer Peterson, who had grown up in Millbrook and knew the power dynamics as well as anyone, took a perfunctory report and suggested that Sarah consider installing security cameras. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. When she asked about investigating who might have done this, he shrugged and mentioned that downtown had been having problems with vandalism lately. This was the third incident in as many weeks. First, someone had keyed her car while it was parked behind the store. Then, her outdoor book display had been vandalized, with dozens of books thrown into the street and damaged beyond repair. Now this. Sarah stood among the broken glass, fighting back tears of frustration and fear. She called Marcus, who was in Seattle on business. His voice turned cold when she described what had happened, but he simply asked if she was hurt and whether she felt safe staying in the apartment above the store. When Sarah assured him she was physically fine, Marcus's tone became thoughtful, almost calculating. "This isn't random vandalism," he said quietly. "Someone is trying to drive you out systematically." Sarah had reached the same conclusion but had been afraid to voice it. The timing of the incidents, combined with the building violations and supply chain problems, painted a clear picture of coordinated harassment. Someone with influence in Millbrook wanted Chapter and Verse to fail, and they were willing to escalate their tactics until she gave up. The next morning brought more bad news. Sarah's insurance company informed her that her premium would be increasing significantly due to the recent claims. The cost of replacing the window, repairing the door, and replacing damaged inventory would be covered, but future incidents might affect her coverage. The message was clear. She was being viewed as a high-risk client. As if the insurance news wasn't enough, Sarah received a visit from her landlord that afternoon. Mr. Morrison had always been fair and supportive, but today he seemed uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact, as he explained that he had received complaints about the store from other business owners on the block. "They're saying the vandalism is making the whole street look bad," he said, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation. "I don't agree, Sarah, but I'm getting pressure to consider other tenants." Sarah realized that even sympathetic people were being turned against her through fear and economic pressure. The campaign to drive her out was more sophisticated than random harassment. Someone was systematically targeting every aspect of her business, from suppliers to city officials to her own landlord. That evening, Sarah sat alone in her damaged store, surrounded by the books she had dreamed of sharing with her community. The Halloween decorations she had put up for the children's event looked festive and hopeful, a stark contrast to the boarded-up window and police tape. She thought about calling her parents, but didn't want to worry them further. They had already expressed concerns about her safety and suggested she might want to consider closing the store temporarily. For the first time since opening Chapter and Verse, Sarah wondered if she was fighting a battle she couldn't win. The constant stress was affecting her health and her relationship with Marcus. She barely slept anymore, jumping at every sound outside her apartment. The joy she had found in recommending books to customers was being overshadowed by worry about the next attack on her business. But giving up felt like betraying everyone who had supported her dream. The regular customers who depended on her store for their reading material. The local authors who had finally found a platform for their work. The children who came to story time with bright, eager faces. And herself, the 12-year-old girl who had pressed her face against Peterson's window and promised to bring books back to Millbrook. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Flying back early, we need to talk." Something in his tone made her stomach tighten with apprehension. Marcus had been unusually quiet during their recent conversations, asking probing questions about the harassment and taking detailed notes about each incident. She had assumed he was simply being supportive, but now she wondered if he was planning something more dramatic. As Sarah locked up the store that night, checking the security system twice and scanning the empty street for suspicious activity, she had no idea that Marcus was already implementing a plan that would forever change the balance of power in Millbrook. While she struggled with doubt and fear, he was making phone calls and reviewing financial documents, his business instincts fully engaged for the first time since their relationship began. The war for Chapter and Verse was about to enter a new phase, one that would test not only Sarah's determination to save her store, but also her marriage to a man whose resources and ruthlessness she was only beginning to understand. Marcus arrived at Millbrook the next evening, his usual calm demeanor replaced by something Sarah had never seen before. He walked through Chapter and Verse methodically, examining the boarded window and photographing every detail of the damage. His questions were precise and businesslike, a stark contrast to the supportive husband who usually listened while she vented about daily challenges. "Show me everything," he said, pulling out his phone to record her responses. "Every incident, every violation notice, every supplier delay. I want dates, names, and documentation." Sarah spread out the growing pile of paperwork on her reading table. Building inspection reports, insurance claims, police incident numbers, and correspondence with vendors created a timeline of harassment that looked even more damning when laid out chronologically. Marcus studied each document with the intensity he usually reserved for major business acquisitions. "The pattern is clear," he said finally. "This isn't random targeting. Someone with significant local influence is orchestrating a campaign to force you out." He looked up from the papers, his expression hardening. "I know exactly who's behind this." Sarah had suspected the Henderson family but hadn't wanted to voice accusations without proof. Marcus's certainty surprised her. "How can you be sure?" "Because I've seen this playbook before," Marcus replied. "Small-town power families use the same tactics in every city where I've done business. Regulatory harassment, supplier pressure, selective enforcement of ordinances. Victoria Henderson has been refining these methods for decades." The next morning, Marcus made a series of phone calls while Sarah tried to focus on her customers. She could hear fragments of conversations through the office door, mentions of property acquisitions and legal reviews that made her increasingly nervous. When she asked what he was planning, Marcus would only say he was exploring options. That afternoon brought another unwelcome visitor. Victoria Henderson herself walked into chapter and verse, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floors Sarah had refinished by hand. She was an imposing woman in her 70s, with silver hair and cold blue eyes that seemed to catalog the value of everything they saw. "Miss Chen," Victoria said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. "I think it's time we had a conversation about your future in Millbrook." Sarah straightened behind the counter, refusing to be intimidated. "Mrs. Henderson, what brings you to my store?" Victoria's smile was sharp and predatory. "I'm here to offer you a solution to your recent difficulties. I understand you've been having problems with vandalism and regulatory compliance. Such a shame for a young entrepreneur." The woman's tone made Sarah's skin crawl. "I'm managing just fine, thank you." "Are you?" Victoria moved closer, her presence filling the small space near the counter. "Because I've heard different. Insurance premiums rising, supplier delays, building violations. It must be exhausting trying to keep up with all these unexpected challenges." Sarah realized this was more than intimidation. Victoria was openly admitting her involvement in the harassment campaign. "What do you want?" "I want to help you cut your losses," Victoria replied smoothly. "I'm prepared to make a generous offer for your remaining inventory and to cover your lease termination fees. You could walk away today with enough money to start fresh somewhere else. Somewhere more suitable for your type of business." "My type of business?" Victoria's mask slipped slightly, revealing the contempt beneath her polished exterior. "Small-scale operations that cater to locals rather than attract outside investment. Millbrook is evolving, Miss Chen. We're attracting a higher caliber of businesses and clientele. Your little bookstore, charming as it may be, simply doesn't fit our vision for Main Street's future." Sarah felt anger building in her chest. This community wants and needs a bookstore. We serve families who have lived here for generations. "The community will adapt to what we provide," Victoria said dismissively. "I've already secured commitments from 3 upscale retailers interested in this location. A boutique wine shop, a gallery featuring contemporary art, and a spa specializing in luxury treatments. Businesses that will bring money into Millbrook, rather than simply serving existing residents." The casual cruelty of dismissing the town's longtime residents as unworthy of consideration took Sarah's breath away. "Those people you're so eager to replace built this community. They deserve to have their needs considered." Victoria's laugh was brittle and cold. "Sentiment doesn't pay property taxes or fund municipal improvements. Progress requires difficult decisions, Ms. Chen. I'm offering you the opportunity to be part of the solution rather than an obstacle to overcome. And if I refuse, "Then I'm afraid your challenges will continue to escalate," Victoria replied, not bothering to disguise the threat. "Building codes are constantly updated. Supplier relationships can be very fragile. Insurance companies have become quite risk-averse lately. It would be unfortunate if these problems became unmanageable." Sarah realized she was looking at the face of the enemy she had been fighting for months. Victoria Henderson had the power and connections to make good on every implied threat. But something in the woman's confidence also sparked defiance in Sarah's heart. "I'm not leaving," Sarah said firmly. "This store serves this community, and I won't be bullied into abandoning it." Victoria's expression hardened. "I had hoped we could resolve this amicably. I suppose we'll have to pursue other options." After Victoria left, Sarah called Marcus immediately. He listened to her recount the conversation with growing anger, asking her to repeat specific phrases Victoria had used. When she finished, Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Pack a bag," he said finally. "You're staying at the hotel tonight. I don't want you alone in the apartment after that conversation." "Marcus, you're scaring me. What are you planning?" "I'm planning to end this," he replied. Victoria Henderson has no idea who she's threatening. That evening, Marcus made a series of calls from their hotel room while Sarah tried to process the day's events. She could hear him speaking to lawyers, accountants, and business associates, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to making multi-million-dollar decisions. Terms like hostile acquisition and market position filtered through the conversation. "What did you do?" Sarah asked when he finally hung up. Marcus turned to face her, his expression serious but determined. "I bought the Hendersons' debt." Sarah stared at him. "What does that mean?" "It means I now own the mortgages on half their commercial properties, including the shopping center, where 3 of their anchor tenants are struggling to make rent," Marcus explained. Victoria has been leveraging her real estate holdings to fund expansion projects. She's overextended and vulnerable. The implications began to dawn on Sarah. "You can foreclose on their properties?" "If they default on payments, yes," Marcus confirmed. "But that's not my primary objective. I want Victoria to understand that threatening my wife comes with consequences she hasn't considered." Sarah felt a mixture of awe and unease. Marcus's wealth had always been abstract to her, something that existed in the background of their relationship without affecting their daily lives. Now she was seeing him wield it as a weapon with surgical precision. The next morning brought chaos to the Henderson family empire. Victoria's assistant called Marcus's hotel room 3 times before noon, requesting meetings and offering to negotiate. By afternoon, Victoria herself was demanding an audience, her earlier confidence replaced by barely controlled panic. They met at Marcus's corporate lawyer's office in the city, a neutral location that emphasized the business nature of their discussion. Victoria arrived with her own attorney and a financial advisor, clearly understanding that this was no longer a small-town intimidation campaign. "Mr. Hamilton," Victoria began, her tone considerably more respectful than it had been with Sarah. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding about my intentions regarding your wife's business." Marcus smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I don't think there's been any misunderstanding at all. You've been systematically harassing chapter and verse for months, trying to force my wife out of business through illegal intimidation tactics." "I resent the implication that I've done anything illegal," Victoria replied stiffly. "Then you won't mind if I share our evidence with the State Attorney General's office," Marcus said, sliding a thick folder across the table. Documented patterns of selective building code enforcement, coordination with suppliers to delay deliveries, and orchestrated vandalism designed to create insurance liability. "I believe the technical term is racketeering." Victoria's face went pale as she flipped through the documentation. "This is circumstantial at best." "Perhaps," Marcus agreed. "But I'm sure a thorough investigation would uncover more direct evidence." Federal authorities take corruption charges very seriously, especially when they involve conspiracy to deprive citizens of their civil rights. The threat hung in the air between them. Victoria's lawyer whispered urgently in her ear, clearly advising caution. Sarah watched her husband operate in this environment and realized she was seeing a side of him she had never imagined. "What do you want?" Victoria asked finally. "I want the harassment of my wife's business to stop immediately," Marcus replied. "I want compensation for the damages caused by your campaign." And I want a public apology acknowledging that Chapter and Verse is a valued member of the Millbrook business community." Victoria's jaw tightened. "And in exchange?" "In exchange, I'll consider restructuring your debt obligations on more favorable terms," Marcus said. "Your current payment schedule requires significant cash flow that your properties aren't generating. I could extend your timeline and reduce your interest rates, making your obligations much more manageable." Sarah realized Marcus wasn't just threatening Victoria. He was offering her a way to save face while ending the conflict. It was a sophisticated negotiation that left both parties with something they needed. "I'll need time to consider your proposal," Victoria said stiffly. "You have until tomorrow morning," Marcus replied. "After that, I'll proceed with foreclosure proceedings and turn our evidence over to federal authorities." That evening, Sarah and Marcus walked through downtown Millbrook together, past the other shops and restaurants that made up the community Sarah loved. She felt strange knowing that her husband now held significant power over the economic future of her hometown. "Are you angry with me?" Marcus asked as they stopped in front of Chapter and Verse. Sarah considered the question carefully. "I'm grateful that you protected me, but I'm also scared of what this means for us. I fell in love with someone who appreciated simple things. Tonight, I saw you operate like a corporate raider." "I am both of those people," Marcus replied honestly. "I can enjoy quiet dinners at your parents' restaurant and still know how to destroy someone's financial empire when they threaten my family. The money doesn't define me, but it's a tool I can use when necessary." Sarah understood that their relationship had crossed a threshold. She could no longer pretend that Marcus's wealth was irrelevant to their lives, but she also recognized that he had used that power to protect something she valued more than her own safety, her right to serve her community. Victoria Henderson called the next morning to accept Marcus's terms. The harassment stopped immediately. Building inspectors found her premises in perfect compliance with all regulations. Suppliers resumed their normal delivery schedules. Even the vandalism ceased, though Sarah suspected that had more to do with fear than genuine change of heart. The public apology appeared in the Millbrook Gazette a week later, praising Chapter and Verse as an important community resource and expressing the Henderson family's commitment to supporting local businesses. Sarah knew the words were hollow, but their publication sent a clear message to anyone else who might consider targeting her store. More importantly, the victory sparked a broader awakening in Millbrook's business community. Other small business owners who had faced similar pressures began speaking out, sharing stories of harassment and intimidation they had previously endured in silence. A coalition formed to advocate for fair treatment and transparent municipal policies. Chapter and Verse not only survived but thrived in the aftermath of the conflict. Sarah's customer base grew as people learned about her struggle and chose to support her store as a matter of principle. Local authors organized events to celebrate literary freedom. Parents brought their children to story times that felt more precious for having been nearly lost. But the experience changed Sarah in fundamental ways. She could no longer approach her business with naive optimism about fairness and community spirit. She installed security cameras, maintained detailed records of all interactions with officials, and kept Marcus informed about any unusual incidents. The innocence she had brought to her entrepreneurial dream had been replaced by hard-won wisdom about power and its abuse. Marcus, meanwhile, found ways to use his newfound influence in Millbrook constructively. He quietly purchased several struggling properties downtown and recruited businesses that complemented Sarah's store rather than competing with it. A cafe opened next door to Chapter and Verse, creating a natural gathering place for book lovers. An independent record shop brought music enthusiasts to the area. 6 months after the confrontation with Victoria Henderson, Sarah stood in her thriving bookstore during a busy Saturday afternoon. Children sat in circles listening to volunteer readers. Teenagers browsed the young adult section she had expanded. Elderly residents chatted over coffee and newly published memoirs. She thought about the 12-year-old girl who had promised to bring books back to Millbrook, and realized that keeping that promise had required growing into someone she had never expected to become. Someone who could face down wealthy bullies and survive corporate warfare. Someone married to a man whose power she was still learning to understand and respect. The experience had tested their marriage in ways neither had anticipated, but it had also revealed strengths they might never have discovered otherwise. Marcus had shown her that his wealth came with responsibility and purpose, Sarah had shown him that some things were worth fighting for, regardless of the cost. As she watched her customers browse and discuss books, Sarah felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond simple business success. She had protected something important not just for herself, but for her entire community. The battle with Victoria Henderson had been about more than one small bookstore. It had been about the right of ordinary people to shape their own neighborhoods according to their values, rather than someone else's profit margins. Chapter and verse had become exactly what Sarah had dreamed, the heart of literary life in Millbrook. But now it was also something more, a symbol of what could be achieved when people refused to be intimidated by those who confused wealth with righteousness. Every book sold, every story time held, every author event hosted, was a small victory over the forces that would reduce community life to nothing more than real estate values and profit projections. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.